Morning. I'm Jan Irwin, Head of Education at the Ulrich Museum, and thanks to everyone for joining us this morning for our ongoing series of 10 paired faculty talks taking place during the 23rd Faculty Biennial. It's all part of the process. On view through May 8th, our galleries are open with safety protocols in place Monday through Saturday, 11 to 5, and as always, free to all. Now, in its 46th year, the biennial showcases the breadth of creative work and research being undertaken by the faculty of the School of Art and Design and Creative Industries in art history, art education, ceramics, curatorial practice, drawing, graphic design, painting, photography, printmaking, sculpture, and new media. The series of talks on the biennial's theme, "It's all part of the process," seeks to prompt reflections and start conversations about each faculty member's personal process, highlighting the diversity of activities that contribute to creative practice, from research to studio time to interactions with colleagues and students. I hope you will join us for the next virtual faculty talks on Thursday, March 24th at 11 a.m. with Tina Morano, Assistant Educator of Art Education, and Lori Santos, Associate Professor of Education. This morning, we welcome Jeff Pulaski and Joshua Smith. A lifelong Kansan, Jeff Pulaski earned a Bachelor of Fine Arts in Graphic Design degree from Wichita State University in 1990 and a Master of Fine Arts in Visual Communication from Kansas State University in 2008. Before joining Wichita State in 2000, he worked for the Wichita Eagle, Pioneer Balloon Company, and was self-employed as a freelance designer, working for various businesses in the Wichita area. He is an active letterpress printer, researcher, and collector. For the past 14 years, his research has focused on letterpress printing and its continuing value in today's digital world. His work has been shown at various universities and museums in the US, Ireland, and England, and he has traveled around the world giving talks and delivering workshops to artists and designers interested in the way this hands-on approach to design can influence their current work and practice. His letterpress collection has grown to weigh in at over 12 tons. It includes various platen and cylinder presses, a Prouty power press, newspaper press, a Model 31 linotype, 2 Ludlow casters, and large assortment of metal and wooden type. A lifelong Kansan, Jeff lives outside the small town of Sedgwick with his very patient and understanding wife and 2 of his 3 children. Joshua Smith is a new assistant professor of design at WSU, previously teaching at Crowder College in Missouri, and Fringe University, Mark Arts, and City Arts locally, while running his own graphic design business. A Wichita native, he received his BFA and then MFA from Fort Hays State University before spending a near decade teaching at Crowder College. Joshua built and ran a thriving program of study in graphic design that spanned across multiple campus locations. He brings his passion for the arts to the classroom while expertly assisting students to grasp difficult concepts around the ever-changing digital tools. He believes that art, both in the act of making and in connections made from sharing, makes the world a better place, one human experience at a time. So we will have Jeff and Joshua present their talks back to back, followed by the Q&A, in which we will give everyone attending permission to turn on your cameras and mics to join the conversation. And we really like seeing all of your faces, so I hope you'll do so. And please feel free to add your questions and comments to the chat box throughout the presentations. So I will turn it over to Jeff Pulaski. Welcome, Jeff.
Thanks, Jana. I really appreciate it. And welcome, everybody. Glad you could join us today. Let's see. Let me get my screen share started here. I've got way too many slides, but hopefully I'll go through them very quickly. I've got a timer going too, so I don't, hopefully don't talk too long. So I love type. I love all kinds of type. I love signage, printed, hand-drawn, digital, physical. I really love it. And this is something that I've been in love with for quite a long time. And so whenever I travel where people would come back with family photos and pictures of things they've seen, my pictures tend to be type. And so it's just what I really like to do. As a graphic designer, I work with type every day, and it makes up a lot of what I do. in my research activities, as Janice said, I worked with letterpress. And letterpress is an old technology of printing, wasn't really initiated with Gutenberg, but from Gutenberg forward, it's just kind of arisen letter form that's inked and printed on a printing press. And so the letters are individual and they're hand set. And that's what I really, really enjoy. I've been collecting letterpress equipment for quite a few years, 10 to 15 years at least. And I've filled a garage, a pole barn, really full of this kind of equipment. And recently, because of coronavirus, I've had the opportunity to actually build out a studio in the pole barn where I can unpack all of my materials. So that's what I've been doing lately, is unpacking things and looking at type. And that's kind of led to this desire to photograph and document some of these letter forms that I have in metal. So just a few things of kind of the space that I work in at home. It's very cluttered. I bring things home constantly. Whenever I find things, I drive to pick them up. In fact, you can see one of the comments there from my wife, very supportive in all that I do as I haul stuff into the house. And this is basically what it looks like in these cases full of type. So they're individual metal letters. This is one that I've kind of cleaned out the case and haven't cleaned the type yet, but I have everything setting up so I could see it. And a lot of times it's like this. This is a type that was created in the 1900s, primarily probably the 1900s. Some of it goes back to the 1800s. And this is what I do to relax. I go out and I sort type that are on trays and try and organize it and figure out if I've got more of it. And I organize it by size, and then I go through and organize it by font and style. And there's some just really fascinating little letters in this collection. And I think it's interesting to me to see the marks, the ink, things that are left behind. I always wonder, what did these letters print? Did they announce the birth of a king? Did they announce World War II starting? How were they used? And as I'm sorting them, I do a lot. You can see my hands are pretty dirty because the type's really dirty. But I take lots of little pictures with my phone, and you can see here on this one, there's a style number, and there's actually a hint that this is an M. This is a blackface character. So, I see a lot of those kinds of things, but not a lot of it's not marked. And so we have to look through specimen books to figure out the fonts and all of those kinds of things, manufacturers and stuff like that. So this is a lot of what I do. And when I find letters that are very unique, like this G, it makes it a little easier to go through specimen books to kind of figure out the font, when it was designed, who designed it, things like that. And so as I've done this, I've pulled a lot of letter forms that just haven't, they have a patina to them because of the, they weren't cleaned very well or whatever else, or they're just a really interesting style. And so I've started documenting those through photography, through macro photography. And so I have this set up that I use, and I'll talk a little bit about my process towards the end here. But I have a camera that I bought, especially it's a 50 megapixel Canon camera to be able to shoot really large shots. I found a really good Canon lens, and I set these things out and print them. Part of my process, you'll see there, I make things that help me to hold type in place and to adjust my focus. And so this little white thing I'll show you in a few minutes is something I made to try and hold the letter forms in place so they don't fall over while I'm trying to photograph them. And I do this on my 3D printer. So I kind of design what I need, and I 3D print parts, and then I pull those out and I put them together and see how they work, and trying to make the process easier for me to photograph. So it's probably been as much designing different things as has been photographing. And these are some examples of some of the photos that are in the show and some of the things that I've shot recently. So my plan with all of this is to try and get the complete alphabet in metal and wood type photographed, and be able to show large format prints for all of these things, along with some information about interesting characteristics. So things like the designer, some designers were very prolific, some not so much. But alternate characters. So some of these fonts have two Ks. In this case, this is a font called Elizabeth, where there's a special K that can be used in certain situations if the designer so chooses to set that. And I think that those alternate characters are very interesting. There's quite a few within various fonts. Some things just look interesting to me. This body of the type is actually angled so that the italics go together better. And it's kind of fascinating to me. This is one that I've shot that I haven't cleaned up, and I think this is just a preliminary photograph, so it's not the whole thing. But typographic terms like mind your P's and Q's, they think that came from typography, but this is actually a P on the left side and a Q on the right side. All the type is reversed because when it's inked and printed, you get a mirror image, which is right reading. So, some of these things are photographed together to try and get those ideas across. And then some of the letters are kerned. Kerning is when you pull the letters closer together, so they physically chop away material so that they can pull letters in closer. And that's what these big chunks out of the letter A are for, is to let letters be closer. And when I shot some stuff about a year ago or so for the last faculty show, I had this nice little teeny tiny little bug on my A that I photographed, and I worked quite a bit to get him in the shot because I was kind of fascinated by, he was just a little speck on the paper. So I think this is a 48 point letter. So it's very small, but it's blown up very large. And then ligatures. This is an uncommon ligature, an S and a T that is just kind of a stylistic connection. But it's very interesting to me to see some of these connections. And so my idea is to shoot the whole alphabet, display the whole alphabet, and have information about some of those typographic terms along with the letters. And I find these things fascinating with the letter forms themselves, but also the color, the ink that's been left behind, the damage to the type, and just seeing anything in that kind of macro situation I find really, really very interesting. So let me stop that. And I'll show you a couple of these things that I've 3D printed. So, I use this, this slide guide for my camera. So my camera mounts to this, and this thing allows me to move the camera up and down. So when we're shooting with macro photography, we have a very, very, very small depth of field. It's probably thousandths of an inch that we're able to shoot with the setup that I have. And so I found that this thing didn't work very well because there's just one little knob that allowed me to move my camera up and down to create different areas in the depth of field. And so it's a little hard to see because it's kind of black on black, but there's a structure here that I designed and printed so that I had a bigger knob to turn so I could make smaller adjustments to the position of my camera. So that's part of my process, is trying to figure out how to actually do these things. And then that big white thing that I was in one of the photos is this little type holder. So, it pulls out, it's got springs, it's kind of spring loaded, so that I can open this thing up and put a piece of type in it, and then have that hold the type in place while I'm photographing it. Some of the type is pretty small, and I accidentally took home the letters that I had here on my desk, so I can't hold one up to show, but they're very small, some of them down to 12 and 18 point, but they're tall compared to that. So that it's easy to get them knocked over and for them to fall. And if they fall over, I have to start the whole process again. So I try very hard to kind of keep everything in place. The other thing I was going to share with you is what I do with those photographs once I pull them in. So let me share my Photoshop application here. And so some of these letter forms, I don't know how many there are here, probably 20, 22, 23 photographs that make up this C, but different parts of the photograph are in focus. So this is kind of the face of the letter that's in focus here, and it goes all the way down to here where the background's in focus. And so I do something called layer stacking in Photoshop. I shoot kind of the furthest away area, which is kind of this shoulder area of the type right through here. And then I move my camera up just a fractional amount, and I shoot another photograph, and I move up and shoot another and another and another and another and another. And when I get all these photographs shot, and I think I have the range that I need from the shoulder of the type to the face of the type, I pull everything into Photoshop, and I do this layer stacking operation, and go through and clean things up and try and get the whole thing in focus, because I don't really want areas along the side of the type where it's out of focus. I really want the whole thing to be sharp. And because of the small depth of field that I have, it's very difficult to do that. And so when all of these things get, let's see if I can turn, should have done a Julia Childs and done a voila, here's the final. But if I turn on all these layers, each one has a different part of the image that is blocked out. And so as I do this, hopefully you'll start to see other areas come into focus. And unfortunately, or fortunately, I don't know which, these are very large images. So because of the 50 megapixel camera, being able to print them large, the images that I'm working with are about 150 megabytes each. So each of these is 150 megabytes, and when they're all stacked into one Photoshop file, I think this file is 2.4 gigabytes in size. So it's a very large file, and it takes a lot to work with. So with all of these letter forms that I'm shooting anywhere from 15 to 25 images of each one. And really the space, that depth of field that I'm trying to shoot within is probably less than 1/8 of an inch. So I'm still experimenting, trying to figure out the best way to shoot these, but I really like the results because I like type. And so that's just a little bit about the work and about my process. And I don't think I've taken too long here. So, but that's basically what I'm doing. And I'm happy to answer questions after Josh's presentation. So thanks a lot.
Hello, everyone. I'm Josh Smith. I will go ahead and share my screen, and we'll jump into my presentation and we'll have questions. One moment here. Well, good morning, everyone. I just wanted to start off by saying thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today. Wherever you're at in your life's journey, I wish you well and hope that you can find some of what I share encouraging, as that is my intent. I'd like to share with you what I've been working on lately and the process I use to go about making this kind of work. I'll also talk a little bit about my philosophy, that is essentially the reason behind why I make things. These will be in no particular order, because in a certain sense, these three things are inexorably linked. And in a sense, they really are three parts of the same whole. Now, generally speaking, all my work starts in my notes app on my phone, primarily writing my ideas down in a flurry to try and get them out of my head and into the written word so that I can evaluate how useful they are, expand on them, edit them, and so on. Even this presentation here, as I am writing and imagining this moment ahead of time to the now where I'm presenting it, is also in my notes app. Although this is what I would consider the first step in the process of creating my work, there is a crucial earlier step that I'd like to highlight. We could call it process step 0, because 0 comes before 1. Now, this process is interesting because it's a necessary emptiness, as in the definition of 0 meaning void. In the sense, this process step 0 is like space, and that space is a crucial requirement for the stars to exist. And in that sense, maybe space is a better name for it. It is the act of providing the space needed to discover new ideas, the kind of spaces that you create within yourself, fueled by the excitement of learning something new. It would be akin to taking a moment to clear a space before counting your marbles. That process of finding new ideas of discovery is essential, and almost always begins with research. Research, I think, is a term for actively paying attention. The purpose of research is to lead to discovery. It's like a journey of branching pathways that potentially arrive at a sudden and unexpected connection. Research is a hike, and discovery is the view at the end, and the view is always worth the hike. This particular research journey begins at one of those discoveries. Among many other avenues of paying attention to what's happening in the world, I'm an avid podcast listener, one of which is Yang Speaks, It's a podcast put on by Andrew Yang. It's a really nice podcast to listen to because it's not full of vitriolic political rhetoric. Instead, it is focused on discussing ways our government and our lives can be better. It is focused on the solutions. In this particular episode, Andrew Yang was having a conversation with Dr. Lawrence Lessig, a longtime advocate for democracy reform. Lawrence himself has had a long career at universities such as Yale and Harvard, and has been the top scholarly mind on law and ethics at Harvard for many years. He's also put on this fantastic TED Talk a few years ago. Check it out if you're interested. It is very compelling. Anyway, Andrew Yang and Lawrence Lessig were talking about, among other things, this idea called democracy dollars. Democracy dollars is a potential solution to the problem in our elections. Essentially, in any election, we vote on the candidates, but who those candidates are is first chosen by the biggest money donors. Without that funding, we would potentially not even hear of a candidate. This has shifted our democracy to be dependent upon the funders and dependent upon the people. Competing dependencies, possibly conflicting dependencies, depending upon who the funders are. This issue here is that this is a completely legal corruption of what the founders intended for our democratic republic. As outlined in the Hamilton and Madison's Federalist Papers, the federal government ought to be dependent upon the people alone. Enter Democracy Dollars, a voucher program to provide every citizen with an opportunity to contribute to the candidate of their choosing, not just the 0.05% of Americans who currently contribute more than 60% of all super PAC money, but to instead have publicly funded congressional campaigns. From my research, I've found that this idea is already in place and being tested at citywide scales. From this source, Democracy Dollars as a way to reform campaign finance has already had a trial run as a program in Albuquerque, New Mexico, another in Seattle, and has been proposed on a small scale in a few other places. According to the article, it's not even a problem of the solution not working. It was simply that people didn't know about it or understand it. The costs associated with promoting the idea is way more expensive than funding the initiative. That is the perfect space for design. That is the space for a beautiful solution to communicate to a wide audience. There are websites out there that sort of explain how this process could be nationalized. It was one of Andrew Yang's speaking points during his presidential campaign and how I first heard about the idea. But they are plain text on a plain background. There is no feeling, no narrative, and certainly no artwork. There have never been solutions presented in these spaces in a way that makes it as monumental as Swedish illustrator Kilian Eng's work, one of my inspirations for this project, or as magnificent and sublime as the late Jean Girard's work, nor as bright and brilliant. This is my proposed design solution: to build a website that provides that missing education surrounding Democracy Dollars program, but in a beautiful and engaging way, to tell the optimistic narrative of how things can be bettered. Because in an age of overinformation, you can't shout to be heard. You need to speak beautifully and meaningfully about topics and in an earnest way. And to provide the space for people to digest information driven by narratives reinforced by large-scale illustrative analogies. The process of creating this website project starts as any web design would: writing, planning, and sketching. Multiple iterations of the scenes are sketched out until I've planned, drawn, and redrawn the cascading narrative one sketch at a time with the connecting illustrated scenes, and then built wireframes for each part, which is to help plan the divisions between the spaces and help plot the spaces needed for the narrative. Next, it's time to take the full create of the monumental space, one shape after another, digitally drawing with a Wacom tablet and a pencil tool, every piece in stacking and overlapping layers, until I've built up enough depth to be able to create the scene, hopefully evoking that monumental feel. I've always looked up to the work and philosophies of the Art Nouveau artists, including Alphonse Mucha, who was also a working graphic artist in his time. The Nouveau artist's sensibility of being inspired by nature in color and form seems like the perfect antidote to our otherwise heavily digital lives. And I thought the overtly vitriolic political realm would be a great place to bring in some nice, calming, naturally inspired beauty. So I too have looked up to nature, being influenced by the natural beauty of our Kansas skies, taking tons and tons and tons of reference photos. These are just a very small sampling there. To not only understand how to see and create the clouds, but to also use those references to individually extract the gorgeous color palettes of our skies to use for this project and for other projects. For my current work, the illustrated scenes are drawn layer by layer on top of a base color, building up what I call manual gradients of the colors. Line work is then added one little brushstroke at a time to both blend the layers together and add transitions in the spaces between and complement and imply movement. trying to capture the natural variety with which the clouds undulate and bend, before finally creating and overlaying subtle gradients of color to create lighting. All of this is ultimately made to complement and support and tell the introductory narrative to Democracy Dollars, A Story of Optimism. Democracy Dollars is a story of optimism, but like so many silver linings, it arises from cloudy skies. It is an elegant solution to the problem of unequal representation in our elections. 2020 has proven to us all that if we do not change our course, we will not weather even the current storm. As long as political incentives continue to lean toward the green, we will never achieve our real goal of building a truly representative democracy. Now, there are 2 more scenes planned for this intro, one sketched here that will continue. How can we avoid even the serious falls that we can already see when the system is designed to protect the status quo? Career politicians are incentivized to represent only those who contribute to their re-election campaigns. And the next scene sketched here, this is the fundamental corruption in our democracy. Economic value outweighs the human value. Only the candidates who raise the most money even get to be on the ballot. This means the richest donors get to choose who we're allowed to vote for. And it will continue. Here I'm showing a color study for this final scene. Give the power to the people through democracy dollars. Let's redesign the system by giving every voter a voucher to support the candidates of their choice. Now, obviously, I have a long way to go with this project. Showing here is scene 4, working on developing the flow of the waves cascading down the waterfall. The plans are to make it interactive by adding, for example, parallax scrolling effects so that certain parts of the clouds and the waves move independently while scrolling through the introduction, creating even greater depth through the work. Now, this work does take some time, and as I stated before, it starts with several drawings until I get something that is as close as I can to how the illustration should be proportioned and within the desired perspective. I then scan that drawing into the computer and start blocking out color, similar to how the painter might block out colors on a canvas. By carefully defining and redefining the edges, carefully selecting the colors to fill each defined area. With this particular illustration, I created a few custom brushes to create the consistent line lengths of the stylized rain, and then tried out a few different ways to layer up and build depth in the waves, in the sea, and the smoke billowing from the ship. I went in and carefully edged the spaces between each layer in the sky, trying to be consistent with the line quality compared to the first and second scenes, while also allowing the focus to be on the ship in the water. And then added stippling to this with the same brush work to add texture and imply movement within the waves near the bow of the ship. There was also a balance struck there with how abstract those waves are. I focused a lot of attention on the focal point of the ship, which is clearly marked to be the subject of the USA. There's also a few details from layering the smoke from the oversized smokestack. And last but not least, of course, the typography. It is a very traditional serif font that I edited to appear to be sort of a hybrid script font. And from this detailed shot, you can see that I actually moved one of those custom ligatures right here, as well as some of the uniqueness between the variety of the letter combinations. So different ways to sort of create those letter forms. Now, all of these little details stack to result in a final iteration of the 3rd scene in the intro to the narrative. I thought it might be a fun introduction to a little behind the scenes look that you can see there. There's about 40 layers in this document, and some of the resulting supporting items left outside the canvas, but within the workspace. Those include color palettes, layers of gradients, and some of the overlays that I use for lighting. Compared to the first scene in the introduction, which was by far the most complex, with over 8,000 objects, almost all of which are brushstrokes. Here you can see a closer detail. What you're looking at as the brushstrokes is without any color applied. It's what we call the outline view in the document. Now, it's all part of the process, and you may be wondering, why am I doing all this? Why make so many tiny little points and lines? Some of you here may know about Milton Glaser. He's a famous graphic artist and designer and teacher who passed away recently. And one of my favorite quotes by him is when he's talking about a book by Lewis Hyde called The Gift. In the book, Lewis Hyde talks about why people make things. In a way, they are gifts so that everyone can be part of the shared experience. And of this book, Milton Glaser said, "There's this leap of the imagination," when Hyde writes, "and this is what artists do in culture. Artists provide that gift to the culture so that people can have something in common. If I like Mozart and you like Mozart, then our chances of killing each other has been diminished." I'd like to take this philosophy of making gifts for our culture a bit further into the political realm. What if we could also leave our government more beautiful as a gift to the culture? That is my current and ongoing work. I did receive an IRCA grant for it. I want to continue to find ways to create beauty in places that have very little. Beauty, I think, is a healing process for broken systems. Beauty connects us and brings us together. Now, there are tons of ways to fix our government, lots of ideas out there that can help make a better tomorrow. It's not having the ideas that's the issue, it's promoting them. And that is the perfect space for design. In the end, I'm motivated by something Neil deGrasse Tyson once said. I am driven by two main philosophies: know more today about the world than I knew yesterday, and lessen the suffering of others. You'll be surprised at how far that gets you. I would like to find out. So thank you again very much. I will stop sharing and pass it over to Jenna, and I believe we'll have Q&A.
Oh, thank you both. I'm going to take a minute, as for any of you who have been attending our faculty talks, you know this takes just a little bit of time for me to bring you all in. So be patient with me. And if you have a question, please be sure to type it into the chat box if you're not going to join us in person. Almost there, everyone. Hey, Irma.
Hello. Hello to both of you. It was a lovely talk.
Thanks. It's good to see you.
I do have questions for both of you.
All right. Well, why don't you go ahead and start while
Yeah,
we're
go
waiting
ahead,
for
Irma.
Jeff? Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, Jeff, I can start with you. I have a question that doesn't relate to your process, but more of a possibility if you are considering doing something in the future that relates to using those typefaces that you found, or letter forms that you found, like maybe doing a poster series or producing a book that will display that variety of forms that you discovered. I don't know. I was just curious if you were thinking about that.
Yeah. Part of what I want to do with these is, once I get the photographs done, I've got this thought that I'd like to have an exhibition available that people could, if they wanted to show it at various universities. But with the kind of write-up or the information about the letter form and why I shot it, my thought was to actually print that letter form on the little card that would go next to the image, so that you could see, how the letter form prints when we would look at it in print, and then what it looks like up close. So that's one aspect to it. I've also thought about trying to do some sort of a, like a coffee table book of a lot of photographs of these things. Just I like macro photography. I like seeing things up close that I can't see in real life, just because of the size. So I thought about that also. And with all of these, with not so much with the metal letter forms, but I certainly have a large collection of wood type also that gets pretty large. I've printed lots of posters in the past, and will again once I have my studio all up and running. But as far as there are lots of specimen books out there. In fact, this is my reading material that goes along with with my research. So this is Mac McGrew's Metal Typefaces. It's a big book, but it's easy to read because most of it, it's just alphabets of various styles. So I have those, and one from England. I've got lots of them, but yeah, it is kind of thinking about how I can use some of those metal types and wood types that I have. So, and I invite collaboration.
Yeah, I'll think about it. Now, why I had this question in mind was because you mentioned during the talk that you were wondering about some of the typefaces. What were they used for?
Mm-hmm.
Like if they were used to announce the birth of a king, I believe you said, or something like that. And you and I do know that, and some people here, that typefaces have this atmosphere, personality about them.
Yeah.
So your curiosity was in the right way, and I was just wondering if you were thinking of using some of that characteristics and then producing something of your own through those letter forms.
Yeah. I've had different thoughts over the years. One thing I always thought would be interesting would be to try and find or to look and find some of the, I have a fascination with wood type also, just because of the craft and how it's made and all the rest. But I've always thought it would be interesting to see what letter forms I have and see if I could find places where that letter form, that style, probably not that letter, was actually used. But one of the interesting things about wood type, especially large wood type, is it could be 100 years old. It could be hand carved. There are lots of little nicks and dings and things in it. And I thought, wouldn't it be interesting to kind of say, this little nick or crack happened when I announced this thing to the world, and this one happened when I was used in this advertisement for Doritos, and this one happened when this thing happened, and kind of talk about that historical aspect that could be with the type. I thought would be rather interesting. But yeah, I think there's lots of things, and I think there's lots of opportunities for people who are thinking about it, trying to be creative. So.
We have a couple of questions in the chat box. First one is for you, Jeff, from James Farley. What metal is the metallic type you collect?
Well, it's type metal. That's what we say, because what it really is makes people nervous, although I don't think it should. One of the things that Gutenberg did, he didn't invent printing. Printing was around long before Gutenberg. He didn't invent metal type. Metal type was used by the Chinese and the Koreans hundreds of years before Gutenberg, in fact, thousands of years before Gutenberg. What he did was he found the right mixture of metal, which is lead, tin, and antimony. Lead gives it body, tin gives it strength, and antimony makes it flow. And so he found the right mixture of those metals to make it easy to cast type. Plus, he was dealing with a much smaller character set. So the type that I collect is mostly, it's lead, tin, and antimony, although some of it's wood type. There is some that's made of brass. People get a little nervous about lead because we're hypersensitive to lead poisoning and things like that. But I know people who've worked in printing facilities their entire lives, and they don't have lead poisoning. They don't have higher levels of lead. So it's fairly safe and stable. You don't want to start sanding it, eating it, things like that. But that's what it is. It's lead, tin, and antimony in different percentages, and sometimes brass, a lot of times wood.
And Josh, Brian Lawrence asks, excuse me, what would be the process that democracy dollars would be implemented or adopted on a local level?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I believe it'd be a voucher. So it's not legal tender until it becomes part of someone's political campaign, and then it would be redeemable by them for real money. So it's not usable in any other form. But essentially, it would be a voucher. I don't know if they would need to be paper. I think it'd perfectly be acceptable if it was like a digital format to be able to send to someone, kind of in the same way you send a Venmo or a PayPal link, to just be able to make that contribution. I think the benefit there is that then, as the main source of funding would be shifted from private parties to more the public, then a lot of the political campaigns and funding would be focused on trying to do the initiatives that people are asking for, rather than the very, very small fraction of kind of private funding. Yeah, great question.
And he has a follow-up. Is this a legislative change?
It potentially would be. It would need to be something that we could incorporate in that, which is part of the difficulty in being able to change it, because you're asking the people who are maybe not incentivized to make this change to make a change. So it certainly needs to have the backing of the people for it to be something that we can adopt. As I kind of outlined in the presentation too, it has been adopted in a few very small places. I think Seattle had the most success with it so far. So it's being tested on a small scale, which I think is very promising. I think it's just trying to get that kind of notoriety out there. So yeah, great question.
So
Josh,
go ahead, Jeff.
So Josh, with that, so like maybe the government would say that Jeff Pulaski has 100 vouchers that he can use. And I would say, well, I want to give 50 of them to this candidate, and I want to give 20 of them to that candidate, and 15 to this guy and 15 to that lady. And then that would kind of divide up how, once everybody did that, that would divide up how the public financing would be distributed among those candidates.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And there have been, some suggestions that $100 would be a good amount. I think what they tried at the local levels in Seattle and Albuquerque were $25 per person. And then there have been other days of 300, depending on the amounts. But yeah, that's exactly right. Just however you want to spend it in whatever amounts.
Okay, interesting.
And in Seattle, is it primarily local and state government that they've implemented this?
Yep, that's exactly right. Yeah, it's local and state. I think it may be actually just local for Seattle, so not even state.
Mm-hmm.
Great question.
Interesting. So do you have a plan for moving this forward?
Yes, so finishing the website is the first sort of step in that plan. Once I've done that and I can present it to people like Lawrence Lessig, actually sent him an email a couple of months ago and he replied to it, which is amazing. So just sort of a cold email. And then, so we've got some kind of a communication set up there. He may be interested in having avenues where it can be further promoted in that sense, but really trying to delight people without having it be a very kind of toxic political conversation about the solutions, I think is really the main focus of the work right now, to try and have that kind of built into it, while then also providing, statistics and process questions and answers within that space. Again, it's kind of an introduction to that. So once the website's set up, that's the first step. I do have a couple other grants that Jeff has actually helped me find, which is fabulous, that I'm excited to write for. They're due here at the end of April. To be able to further this kind of work. So very, very excited about that too. So there are a few moves that I'm ready to make.
Excellent. Does anyone else have any questions? Yeah.
I have a question for Josh. And I did write it down. So how do you see this visual language of illustration, which has very particular interpretation, connect or intersect with user interface, because it's a website?
Yeah, so essentially I have to break it into pieces. So for now I had to make it for the show. So it's definitely like very print oriented to be able to put it up on the wall. And part of a way that I can reach out with it as well is to have a print, traveling show to be able to then take it places and do talks potentially. But yeah, to answer your question, it needs to be split into pieces, right? So like the form of it needs to have a very wide background to fit many different screen sizes. It needs to be reformatted to fit on the phone versus on a computer screen. I'm envisioning that the certain pieces that I can cut out and like the different clouds, as I tried to show in the presentation with PowerPoint limitations, that is to be able to show that it can move separately, so that when you scroll, you can have scroll effects within those clouds to sort of move across the screen as you're going into the space. So I'm really trying to set up an environment to be able to have the conversation. But yeah, it does have to be cut into pieces and assembled and disassembled and then reassembled on the page so that it can be read in many different formats. That was a great question.
Well, as you were displaying it and the way that it is displayed in the museum, as I understand, because I saw your Instagram post, it feels like it's a illustration of a book. or some sort, but you just translated it from the print world to this digital world and gave it another dimension where you can interact with it.
Yeah, that's really cool.
Beautiful.
That's an awesome interpretation. I think that's really encouraging. So it may, I mean, it may even be able to be in some kind of a book format at some point, which would be really interesting too. And maybe a crossover between kind of the traditional book area and websites is maybe a good intersection there. Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you.
No problem. I mean, thank you for that visual experience on your project.
Thank you very much.
Can I ask a question? Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yes.
go ahead, Ksenia.
This is a question for both of you, but I guess I'll start by asking it. Do you prefer Josh or Joshua? I should know this.
Either is perfectly fine. Yeah. No
Okay.
problem.
I mean, you talked about your philosophy, and I really liked and appreciated the kind of the quotes from Neil deGrasse Tyson and you know, other sources on kind of the inspiration behind graphic design. And maybe that's a question for Irma too, since she's on this in this conversation. So how do you translate in your teaching, and I guess in your own thinking, kind of these aspirations for graphic design with the everyday reality of being, say, a commercial graphic designer, where you are, you know, kind of a hired gun to message for whoever, you know, wants the messaging and whose values or aspirations may not align with yours?
That's a fabulous question. Really, I encourage everyone to have some kind of, and it may be an intersection between art and design. So artists, I think, promote their own ideas and their own sensibilities that are, of course, impacted by society, and maybe express those through to the society. And designers, you know, as you said, we're hired to be able to express others' ideas. And I think there's an intersection there where potentially, and I think as a practice, as a designer and an artist, we should have those own pursuits in addition to the things that we're asked to do and the things that we need to do for work. So I try to encourage my students to have that conversation. I think there's a space for that. Social media is, of course, a huge space for that nowadays, where people can have that opportunity to speak loudly and in a beautiful way about things that they're passionate about. And I think that makes them better designers because they're excited to have that opportunity to say those things. And I think it impacts their work in a positive way as they continue to do that. So it's kind of a positive feedback loop, I think.
Yeah, and I think as designers, it's really important to think about, you know, the what we do and how we do it. And you know, when I freelanced, I had a number of times, a couple of times, when I had clients that came to me that said, "Hey, this is what I need," but it was something that just fell outside of what I was comfortable doing. So, like, I don't smoke. My dad smoked for 40 to 50 years. It caused great health problems for him. But I won't do design work for anything that's tobacco related. And I have had, you know, one client that wanted me to do something that was sponsored by, I believe it was sponsored by one of the tobacco companies. And I just said, you know, look, I can't do it. And it's, you know, it's legal. It's a legal product. People can choose whether they do it or not, but I can't be involved. And it was really tangential to the what he was trying to promote. But it was just like, I wouldn't put my heart and soul in it. And so you're better off finding somebody that doesn't have that issue. And I think this is something that students have to face when they go out to look for jobs. You know, they need to figure out where they stand. And then, you know, it's incumbent on them, I think, as a professional, to let those biases be known. And if you go to work for a place that says, this is what we're promoting, if you want the job, you have to do it, then, you know, you have to make that choice. Because as a professional, you need to do the best you can. And if you can't do the best, then you have to decide. So that's not really quite the answer to your question, but I think it's a part of it in there. And I think, you know, I don't feel badly against anybody who wants to do work for a client or a company that I don't do work for it. Everybody's got to get their voice out and their message out. But I think we as designers have to decide where we're comfortable and then do it. And you know, in my work, I like to try and educate. I don't think of myself as an artist. I think of myself as a designer. And so I try and do that through my pieces. But
No, I mean, I think those are both great answers. I don't know, Irma, do you want to chime in since all three of you guys teach sort of interrelated topics?
Yeah, I can. Well, there is obviously a difference between design and art, but also a very obvious intersection. So the two cannot exist without the other. So as an artist, you are connected with yourself and you are invited to express yourself. But as a designer, you really have to understand what is the message that you are communicating, because it's a communication. It doesn't mean you should strip away your sensibility or what you have either learned in a visual language, or you're pursuing a particular visual language, or you're good at illustration. If, for example, I'm not good at illustration, I'm good at some other expression in visual realm, and I will not bend and go and learn illustration just because that is traditionally thought as graphic design. But the point is, I still can use visual language to communicate a message for a client, but doesn't mean also that the client should give me an idea. I am the one being educated to work with that client and come up with an idea kind of together. Because without its information, or his, hers, client's information, my work as a designer doesn't exist. It's a different platform and a different mindset. Graphic design is a very particular mindset, and an artist world is a very particular mindset. They're using the same tools, but the goal is very different. And I encourage my students, I'm successful, sometimes I'm not, but I do encourage them to still pursue what they like, but understand that they need to engage with the client in that communication and see if that their sensibility can intersect with clients. Sometimes it will, and you will have a very good time during the project. Sometimes it will not, and you will have to bend, because I believe ex-student mentioned that we are kind of chameleons. And that is very true. So I hope that answered your question. I said a lot of things.
Oh yeah, no, this was, I think between the three of you, I think that for me, that's sort of enlightening. Because I don't spend a ton of time every day thinking about differences between graphic design and art. But no, I think that was all really interesting.
I think the big thing is that I was talking with a student yesterday through an advising session, and I think it's thought of as the designers do what the clients want, but really it's a little bit different, because what the designers should be doing is understanding the client's viewpoint and product, whether that's an idea or a physical product, but they need to know who the target audience is, because what we're really trying to do is reach their audience. And so if they're selling products that are, or ideas that are targeted at 20-year-old female college students, as a 53-year-old male who's not a college student but works at one, I need to understand what that audience likes. And one of the big challenges I think we have with our students is to get them to not just design solutions that they like, but whoever their potential audience is will respond to. And so you would design something very differently if you're targeting a 20-year-old female college student versus a 53-year-old male with children. The messaging can be the same potentially, but probably it's going to be different, because I'm going to respond to different things than a 20-year-old is going to respond to. And so I think, we really want to know who our target audience is so that we can reach them. And sometimes the client gets in the way of that, because it's not the message that they are also trying to advertise to themselves and not really thinking necessarily about who their audience is. So.
Any last questions?
Come on, students out there. I see a number of you. Don't you have any questions?
They had a class with me previously, so, I scared them off. So it's my fault.
No. Some of them are good at asking questions.
All right. Well, this has been a great morning. of conversation. And thank you all. And thank you, Irma, for,
Hey,
for
Janet,
yes.
Janet, there is a question from Emily Christensen.
Oh, there is. Thank you, Ksenia.
Sure.
I could keep
Emily
track of all
asks,
of the things.
yeah, Emily asks, how do you all teach students how to develop their own processes?
I think primarily what I've done, I mean, there is a process to design generally that most of us do, and that's, listening to a client and then researching, suggesting ideas, testing those ideas, and then going back through the loop and doing it all again. And I think that's, students can certainly find their own varieties for that, but that's kind of the basic thing that most designers do. So I think, it's really, again, talking to students recently with advising, to me, it's really a process of exploration. They need to start exploring and figure out how to do that, how to explore ideas, how to research, how to understand, make connections, all of those things. Josh, how do you go about that with students?
Yeah, that's a really, really good question. And if you're thinking more process, I guess, I mean, the ideas is certainly one part, and a lot of it is we encourage them to explore as many ideas as possible before choosing one. And I think that's not necessarily something that a traditional art avenue necessarily is always kind of very, very focused on. Sometimes it's more exploring the ideas that are more internal, but I think especially with target audience, you need to understand what the message is, you need to understand who you're trying to speak to, and then what are as many ideas as you can generate within the time allowed to be able to speak for and to those groups. When you do that, you can then start looking at different design sensibilities. Style is kind of one of those, the different ways that you treat line and shape and color, and all the art tools that we use to be able to express and communicate that message in a variety of ways. And then it does become an exploration. As Jeff is saying, it's very kind of a journey that you go on to be able to find and explore as many of the ideas as you can, and then choose the best one that's most appropriate for the situation. That's a great question. Do you want to answer that too?
Oh, yeah, I can jump in quickly. Yeah. Well, I stuck on this own process. So there is this general notion that Jeff mentioned that there are these steps, yes, but then within these steps, everyone find their own path. And this whole exhibition show is about that, and we are all here talking about our own process. I think I developed something that is in stages where I don't introduce clients for some assignments because I want them to run freely and run after ideas without any constraints. Because when you introduce a client, it's a very narrow path that they can walk. That there's audience and there's this client and this very particular information about this particular client, and then it limits sometimes that exploration phase. So I tend to have levels, and that corresponds to the levels of the study. So unless they are seniors, I will not strictly introduce clients, but through assignments, I will deviate from that and just call it a different name, but still go through the steps of the process so that they can actually find their own, hopefully.
All right, I think in the interest of everyone's time today, we'll go ahead and wrap it up. I want to thank everyone for joining us this morning, and hopefully we'll see you all back next week for the next in the series. And thank you, Josh, and thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Irma, for joining us. It was awesome. And yeah, have a lovely day. Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.